but I did
Yeah.
an episode a couple episodes ago, um, where I talked about how I felt like the past was like a black and white time when I was a
Right.
kid, because,
Right.
growing up in the 70s and learning about the civil rights movement, all the pictures were black and white. And that seemed to have a kind of effect on how I thought about things. Like I felt like I was now in a color world.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that crazy? Because the world has never been black and white,
I know.
but it feels like it was. It feels like
Exactly,
it.
because we were conditioned with those images. And I was
Right.
just talking about how, as an adult, I now feel like past, present, and future are less siloed
Exactly.
than I
Because
thought.
we associated the past with documentation of the past, not with the actual past.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's wild. But
And what is
the
the
actual
actual?
past was always now. The actual past was always
Exactly.
yeah.
The actual past is always what everything's happening now.
It's the only moment. Oh Lord.
I feel like this matters.
Right.
I
Yeah, me
don't
too.
really know exactly why.
Hmm.
But when these kinds of themes and these lines of inquiry show up,
Yeah.
I think that matters. Maybe it's just a kind of personal, literal personal development issue.
I don't
It's
know.
just but I do think that there's a kind of collective aspect to it
I
also.
do too, strongly believe
Yeah.
that
And
personally.
a lot of times when something comes up for me, I start seeing it reflected in other conversations and other spaces. I hear words coming out of other people's mouths that I've been
Yes.
thinking about.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
this idea of linear time
Right?
is, I don't know why it matters, but it seems to. I guess maybe
Okay.
because, you know, I don't really veer into the realm of politics explicitly in my podcast, and I really love that.
I hear you.
But since we're talking about it, I will say this, that
Hmm.
this concept of make America great again is dealing with linear time, a
Right? That's
kind of
true. Very much so.
fictional linear time, like it's engaging with that idea of past and present and future in a very
Yeah.
specific kind of way.
Yeah. Specifically, yeah.
And
Hmm.
it's been in the forefront for 8 years in the conversation.
Right.
So I
That's
do,
true.
and then there's AI
And like any
and
good slogan,
technology.
it has a kind of archetypal vagueness to it. It
Mhm.
can mean whatever a few million people want it to mean, even though they don't necessarily mean the same thing. Like a cross or a circle, make America great again is vague enough to be spiritually resonant with a lot of people. We would all like something to be great again, even if it's not America. We all wish for something that we've lost and that we would love to regain. And so, kind of aligning that with nationalism, putting the name of a country into it, can really strike a chord. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so deeply rooted in fiction.
Which is also fiction is the creation of meaning.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not necessarily just quote unquote lies. It's about saying what you would like to be real because we do have some agency to choose or at least to imagine. So, yeah. Yeah, I can't call it bad per se, but I do understand that many of the things associated with it can be pretty bad, in my opinion. Yeah, but I can see an alternative world
Many of the things associated with what?
with the way the slogan is being applied in
Oh,
actual interactions between human beings. You
yeah.
know, like the ideology is being used as a hammer, and what is that hammer hitting? Not necessarily a nail. It might be hitting me on my head,
And me,
and me, and them,
and them, and
and
them.
them. Yeah, and us.
All of us.
Yeah. So yeah. So, but I can see it. I can imagine an alternate world where that slogan had been used in a way that I liked. I can see that. What if it was being associated with, inclusiveness and compassion and equality. Like, let's make this great again in the way that we imagined it could have been once, that type of thing. But no, not how it's being used. So there you
I
go.
can't even really stretch my brain enough to imagine that because it was never in my mind
Yeah.
for anyone who
Yeah.
looks like me or us.
Yeah,
It
I
was
hear you.
never great.
What I just expressed was a thought experiment. I don't think of it that way either.
I
Whenever I
know.
think about the past, I always think like, thank God it's over.
Well, that's
Um,
kind of what I was saying about the black and white pictures.
right.
And so
Oh,
what I was saying it was episode
oh,
45 of my
oh,
podcast.
okay. I thought of that
What,
more like nostalgia when you said it.
no, what I was saying was, I didn't get that deeply into it, but what
Uh-huh.
I was saying was that as a child, I
Yeah.
felt like the past was a black and white world.
Hmm.
You need to,
No, that's someone in the hallway outside of the apartment. I was just scared for
uh,
a second. Yeah. Hmm.
I felt like
In a, yeah.
I felt like the past was a black and white world, and that as a
Mm,
kid in the 70s, I was living in a color world, which was different, which was fundamentally different.
I
Like,
hear you now.
and and as an adult, 55 years later, what I'm
Right.
noticing is that the past, present, and future are not as siloed as I once thought.
Now I hear you.
And
But I didn't
so,
catch that emotional tone of because when you say a black and white world, there's a lot of texture in that phrase that you're using. Like it's not a good thing, not
well,
necessarily a good
I
thing.
was thinking particularly, which I did not
Mm,
get into at all, but
hmm.
what I was thinking, what informed that statement was those pictures of black people and the dogs being sicked on the black people by the police. I saw those
Okay,
images as a child, and they were always in black and white. All
that's
of the
so
Jim
interesting.
Crow, the colored water fountains, all that stuff was always
Black and white,
rendered in black and white images. And as a child, when I saw that,
right?
it was like, well, that and what's really interesting, Nige, is that it wasn't that long before I was born.
Not at all. Yeah,
And I can
yeah,
see that now, 55 years later.
right,
But as a
right,
kid, it seemed like the Stone Ages,
right.
even though it was
Exactly.
only 10, 15 years earlier.
Right, right. Also, because of how far away the possibility of that experience seemed to be to us. Like, I really did not expect
Right.
that to happen to me, honestly.
Exactly.
And when you said black and white world, I was actually thinking of like sepia toned pictures of my grandfather.
Okay.
That's what I was. That's what I was thinking of. And so I was like, oh, I wasn't thinking about, you know, PBS Frontline type thing. I was thinking of like, which is another interesting example because that looks terrible in color. Like those documentaries that we see now with the tense music playing, and it's like, the countdown. There's always a countdown for something. Like, dun, 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 dun. Oh no, there are only 8 seconds left. Something bad and that's
Those frontline documentaries, they are so funny. The way that they use music and drama to
yeah,
do the storytelling. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, so
yeah.
extra.
Like Busta saying, "There's only 5 years left." Back in 1995, but yeah, but I see where you're going now with the black and white thing.
Yeah, that was where
Yeah,
that came from. And I,
right.
as I said, it was just a little blip. I didn't say much about it.
Yeah.
But I guess the point I'm making now is that I am exploring my experience of time in a way that's different because we're still just doing the same human things, wearing
Yes.
different clothes and traveling in
Yes.
different vehicles, and we're doing the same
Wow.
things in different ways. No, okay, no, there's no horse and buggy, and you're not wearing like sackcloth or whatever, but you're still kind of interacting in this basic animal way. And I
You
just think
know,
that's interesting.
and it's what's occurring to me now is that if you take as the kind of central reference point of your spiritual technology, if you take physicality and the body,
Yeah, yeah,
you're tapping into something that has always been here.
exactly.
Yeah. And so it's now allowing you, it's almost like a passport through time to a
Yes.
certain extent. Yeah.
Yes.
And so that's kind of connecting me to what you're saying right now. Yeah. Whereas if you're like using, I don't know, the internet, that's a little harder. I mean, you can still do it because you can say, oh, communication technology, but if you're really using like Tron and Blade Runner and glass plastic screens
Hmm.
as your kind of spiritual canvas to paint on,
Hmm.
that's cutting out a lot of time that we've been here, you know? I don't mean to be like, absolutist about what I'm saying or anything, but I just mean it in a very straightforward way. That the body is such a powerful constant. Everything alive has been embodied. Everything alive, from the smallest unicellular organism up to the blue whale, like that's bigger than your house. It's all been embodied, and this accepting this is kind of accepting your key and your passport into that, with all the ups and the downs, but you know,
Yeah.
but it's very real. It's
Yeah.
very real.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
I the reason I'm getting so excited right now is when I was reading the biography of Harriet Tubman last
Mm,
year,
yeah.
right around this time. It was February
Oh,
of last year. And as
really?
you know, every morning I would get up and read three
Yeah,
pages out loud
yeah. That was February.
of last year.
Wow. Huh, okay.
And reading that book from a somatically oriented place was like mind blowing
Wow.
because it was like, oh, she was physically in the woods, walking through swamps
Right,
in a body.
right. It's real.
And
Hmm.
it's kind of like, okay, when I think about, that's why it was such an interesting confluence of things to find Trisha Hersey's work. She's the one who wrote Rest is
Rest?
Re
Yes. Yeah, rest is resistance.
but she's
Oh,
also the one who talked about the American Maroons
oh, right,
and the
right.
trickster.
The trickster. Right. I remember those conversations.
And she also weaves in this somatic language.
Right.
It's just a
So
very
basically,
powerful coming together of ideas
right. It's
that
like
she
it's
mixes
like your
together.
people.
She just has this cauldron of gumbo. It's just,
As let's be fair, you do you. So I could
yes.
see the resonance there. Yeah.
So, but to read about these moments, and as you know, I really treated it like a research project when I was
Right.
reading Harriet Tubman's biography. I would stop and go read about, you know, other things and other historical events and
Yeah.
freedom or death. There's just so many things there.
Right.
And to think about the fact that these were people in bodies. They weren't
Right.
black and white images.
Images.
They were
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And that's why sometimes it can be so powerful to see. Like there have been these AI updates of historical figures,
Yeah.
and
I've been looking at some of
they're
those
a
too.
little
I
weird
like
and
it.
creepy sometimes, but what's really interesting to me is
Hmm.
that it does sometimes have the effect of humanizing
Exactly.
these people. Like, oh, they were people who had facial expressions and moved around, and they weren't
Right.
stuck in a black and white pose for all of
Right.
eternity, you know?
Right. This is
Yeah.
interesting too because I mean there's that concept that was popular in the 90s with our kind of like appropriation, even though we didn't get it, of like quantum physics and stuff. It was always popular to say everything was quantum back then. And you'd be like, this is my quantum African American cookbook. But but I mean, one of the things that they do talk about is the kind of identity of the wave and the particle,
Yeah.
and that they are kind of paradigms for matter. Matter can exist as a wave, as a particle, and depending on how you choose to approach it, different things become possible. And that connects to me with what we're saying right now, because when you talk about a face being frozen, that's like a particle. But when I'm talking to you right now, the way we normally view people is we're actually seeing a person as transitions between facial sort of or configurations, you know? Like the person's face is constantly moving. And that's actually the feeling that you get of a live face. It's a
Ooh,
moving face. It's not a frozen face. And so it really gives you a different feel when you see someone's face in live motion as opposed to frozen in a snapshot.
yeah,
You don't even get the same kind of feeling of how they look, you know? So
right.
one of the things I enjoy about those AI things is that it lets me I'm saying the same thing you just said, but it lets me relate to the person in the way that I usually relate to a living face, which I
Exactly.
can't do through a frozen photograph. I just
No,
can't. Yeah, no one stays static like that in when they're alive. Face, you can't keep your face still if you wanted to, you know?
no, exactly.
Yeah, so it's sometimes it's hard to make that leap when you're just looking at someone as a photo to what it might have really been like. Our faces change so much, even in just a 10-minute, you know, little period. Yeah,
Yeah,
anyway. Yeah,
yeah.
so I enjoy those AI things, but that's another conversation
It is.
because AI is
I
so
saw a
problematic.
Frederick Douglass one and it just cracked my heart open. I was
Oh,
like,
wow. I haven't seen that. I've seen some old things like, Henry VIII's wives and stuff like that, like people that they have up on the wall in the Metropolitan Museum of Art kind of thing. But I mean, Frederick Douglass is in there too. But I mean, I was seeing like Cleopatra. They were like, this is what Cleopatra might have looked like, you know? And it was like,
I've
oh my
seen a bunch
goodness.
of those too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
interesting.